Our speaker for today is Dr. Laura McConnell. Dr. McConnell is a science fellow in the Regulatory Scientific Affairs team at Bayer Crop Science in the United States. Her role is engaging and building collaborations with the scientific community around the safety, sustainability, and regulation of agricultural innovations. Her expertise is in the fields of analytical and environmental chemistry. Dr. McConnell has been an active volunteer for the American Chemical Society for more than 25 years and was named ACS Fellow in 2014. She currently serves on the ACS Committee on Science and is deputy editor of the journal ACS Agricultural Science and Technology. Thank you so much, Dr. McConnell, for joining us here today. The stage is all yours, Doc.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone from North Carolina in the United States, where I live. Slides are great, but what's more important is connecting with the audience and hopefully everybody can see that. Is that correct? Are you seeing?
Yes, Dr. McConnell, please go ahead.
Excellent. Okay, yeah. Thank you. And so today we're talking about trying to achieve zero hunger and a healthy planet. So there's a balance there, right? You want to generate a lot of food for everyone. You want everyone to have nutritious food, but you also need to protect environmental health as well. And so those are kind of the trade-offs that we deal with every day in our company at Bayer. I also just want to mention that if you want to reach out to me, the best way is on LinkedIn. And I put my LinkedIn handle here on this slide. So I would love to hear from you. So sometimes a single idea can change your life. And this happened to me when I was in undergraduate school at the College of Charleston. I was sitting in my first environmental chemistry lecture. This was my professor at the time, Dr. Frank Keinerd, an amazing professor who really inspired me to pursue chemistry. I was sitting in his lecture and he was talking about the work that he did as a graduate student. So I was not even thinking about grad school at that point. So I was a sophomore in college and listening to his lecture. And he was talking about, in his graduate work, he went out on a research ship. And I actually was able to find a picture of the real research ship that he went out on when he was in graduate school. It was our research vessel, Crawford. And he did a transect between Puerto Rico and Venezuela. And he took very deep ocean water samples from this ship and probably used samplers like the one shown here in this picture, these rosette samplers. And so as you send the samplers down into the ocean, they go up, they're open, like open tubes. And then as you get to different depths, it's programmed to close in a certain order. And so you're capturing the water at a certain depth as you lower the samplers. And so from the samples that he collected, he created an underwater map of salinity. And so this is a figure from the paper that he wrote based on his graduate work. And so I went and actually found the paper and looked at it. And so he used this data to explore a really interesting part of the ocean called the Sargasso Sea. And so this work really inspired me because it made it clear that you're not just doing science in a laboratory all the time. You can actually do science outside in the environment, and you can have impact on environmental quality with the work that you do. And so that was the day that I decided I wanted to pursue a career in environmental chemistry. And so I was very fortunate when I went to University of South Carolina to pursue my PhD. I was able to find my research ship. Essentially, I found an advisor, Dr. Terry Beitelman, who was working in the field of environmental chemistry and working on the study of large lakes. And so I was able to do research in the Great Lakes. I can go out on a research vessel, collect both water samples and air samples. I lugged a lot of equipment around, coolers and boxes and bottles, and worked on a tiny little laboratory inside this ship called the Roger Simons, which was an Environmental Protection Agency research ship. And so I found out that it's really challenging to do research in the environment because you're sitting there on this ship and the floor is moving while you're trying to conduct your work. And that's why I had to put my sampling equipment inside crates that were sort of attached to the countertop because things were trying to move as we were going along in the ship. And so then later I was able to do studies in Lake Tahoe, which is another beautiful lake, and in Lake Baikal in Russia. And so when I was at the University of South Carolina and College of Charleston, my scientific network was quite tiny. I was just a little, starting out scientist. I knew just the people in my lab, maybe a few other people within the department, a few other professors, but I had a fairly limited scientific network. So later, I was able to pursue a career in environmental chemistry at the U.S. Department of Agriculture in an agency called the Agricultural Research Service. And so when I was there, I studied a lot of different types of water bodies. The one that was central to my research was called the Chesapeake Bay. And if you go online, you can look up the Chesapeake Bay. It's one of the largest estuaries in the world. And but it also has about 8 to 10 million people that live within the watershed. And so there's a lot of stress on the environment and the ecosystem within the Chesapeake Bay. And so you can see from the map on the left-hand side, this is the land area that actually drains into the bay. And the bay is actually quite shallow. And so any kind of runoff that's happening can have a pretty significant effect on the water quality. And on the other hand, the Chesapeake Bay has a lot of important species, animal species, fish, oysters, crabs, and that are critical to the economy of the region and to tourism. And so there's always that balance of having economic growth and population growth in a certain area versus trying to protect the environmental quality. And so while I was at the USDA, I got to go out on more research ships and do studies of things like oysters. And then I expanded to doing more work on looking at contaminants in the atmosphere and looking at air concentrations and rain concentrations and looking at atmospheric deposition of chemicals into water bodies. And it was here that I started learning about agriculture. And so I learned that farmers use a lot of different approaches to try to protect water quality. One of these is cover crops. That is, planting a crop in the off season to hold the soil in place so that it doesn't run off. No-till is where you do very minimal disturbance of the soil during the year, and that also mitigates runoff. You can use buffers around streams and even what we call riparian buffers, which are tree buffers, much more substantial, ones that can help protect water quality. And so these are the kinds of practices that I conducted research on to see. I decided to take a leap and do something different. I was recruited by a friend of mine, Ellen Arthur, to come to Bear Crop Science. And guess where I met Ellen? That was at the American Chemical Society meetings. So at the ACS, there's a division called Agro Division. And I had been very active in that division as a scientist at USDA. And I already knew a lot of other scientists from other government labs, from universities, and also from industry. And so when I decided to come to Bayer, um, I already knew several of the people in my team because of my activities at ACS. And so here's Ellen. She was my first boss at Bayer, and this is the team that I worked in. And we worked on the kind of studies, environmental fate studies, that are required testing for new molecules that are sent in for registration to the US EPA. So there's extensive testing that has to happen with any new product, and it can take many, many years to get a new product to market. And so it takes a lot of science and a lot of expertise to do this kind of work. I really enjoyed doing that my first few years at Bayer. And then I moved into a different group called Regulatory Scientific Affairs. And so this is a team that works sort of at a higher level. We're not in the lab anymore, but we're engaging externally with other scientists and also with regulators and policymakers. And so it's science in a different form than research. So, and this is up until recently my boss, Robin Mead, and so she was very supportive of my activities to reach out to engage with university scientists. And so because I had done that for so many years, I was able to continue those kind of efforts working for Bayer. And so that's the kind of things that I do now. And so that got it moved out of order here, but oops, sorry. But this is just to show that when I was at USDA, I sort of grew my network, right? And also at ACS, I was able to expand my network to colleagues in many, many different organizations. And I also encourage, those of you who are graduate students to think about this intentionally and consider how you can expand your network. Now, one thing that I'm very passionate about is another humongous network that I worked on growing, and that is within the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, or IUPAC, and that is the GWB, or sometimes called the Global Women's Breakfast. So this is an effort, it's an annual event, which I invite you to explore. If you go to iupac.org, you can find out more information. And so this happens on a single day each year. Next year, it will be on February 11th. And the idea is to expand and increase diversity in science. And so we're celebrating the success of women in science. We're trying to build a global network to close the gender gap in science and inspire the younger generation. And why is this needed? Why do we care? I think, really for me, it's critical that every single scientist, person who is interested in science, should be able to pursue their ambitions fully, right? There shouldn't be any barriers to a great idea or a great mind. And so we need everyone to be working at their maximum potential in science, um, if we're going to solve a lot of the challenges that we have on the planet. And so I'm so sorry, let me go to the keyboard instead of my mouse. So this is just to show you the progress that we made with the GWB and the number of events since 2019. We've started having this every year. And so the little hearts on the map show you location of the events. And so last year, or this year in 2024, we had over 400 events in 77 countries. And so our theme for the coming year is accelerating equity in science. So I invite you all to participate and register an event at your organization. Okay, so moving on from sort of career path into, why is agricultural research important? So many of you may be pursuing various types of research and various areas of science, and I would encourage you to consider pursuing a career in agricultural research. Now, it's multidisciplinary. You need to know a lot of different things in agriculture: soil science, soil physics, hydrology, chemistry, engineering, all different kinds of sciences involved with agriculture. And really today is sort of a golden age in agriculture. There's so many different technologies that are being developed from different perspectives to make agriculture more sustainable, more productive, and creating more nutritious food. And so, if we think about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, this was a brilliant idea by the United Nations to come up with these 17 goals. And if you think about 2030, we're really getting close. We really have to accelerate our progress. And unfortunately, when you start talking about hunger, the zero hunger is SDG number 2. And really, we're making little progress in this area where it's most important. And so if you go online, you can see how they're tracking progress. And to me, this is something that is so important, not only from a humanitarian perspective, but also from a science perspective. Because if someone does not have proper food, they're not able to pursue a scientific career necessarily. It's very difficult to worry about going to college if you don't have enough food to eat. And so to me, this is probably the most important goal that we should have as a planet is to achieve zero hunger, because that should help to accelerate our scientific progress, because people would be past that barrier, can move on to start thinking about advancing agriculture. And so, there's a lot of connections to agriculture in the Sustainable Development Goals. Obviously, number 2, zero hunger, is important, but agriculture also contributes to many other of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so again, this is what drives me in my work and also my colleagues, and why the work to advance agriculture and make it more sustainable is so important. And you guys have probably seen these types of numbers before, but it's really interesting to think about all the pressures that are currently on our planet. Number one is a growing population and the need for more food. Obviously, we can't keep creating food in the same way that we have. We need to think smarter. We have to be more efficient because the amount of land that we have is set or shrinking. And the amount of resources that we have to grow food is very limited. On the other hand, as climate change progresses, this is actually reducing the efficiency of our crops and creating harvest losses due to, say, strong storms, crazy, rainfall amounts that are happening, 500-year events happening on a regular basis. We've had a number of huge storms here in the United States that have caused massive damage to farms in my little state. And we are losing, the good land that we have for crop protection or for crop production. And so one of the things that we think about is how can we grow more food on less land? And so this is a really cool figure because it's a real field. And so it compares how much land it took to grow 10 bushels per acre or 10 bushels of corn. And so in the 1940s, you can see how efficient it was to grow corn. It took a lot of land to grow 10 bushels of corn. But in the 1980s, with the introduction of advanced cropping systems, you can see the same amount, it was much reduced amount of land to grow the same amount of corn. And that trend has continued and hopefully will continue. And, but we're getting close to probably the maximum that we can grow from a certain area of land. So what else can we do as a company to enhance the sustainability of agriculture? So one of the things that Bayer is doing and other companies are thinking about how they can create a business that actually supports sustainable agriculture. So one of the things that our company is doing is to help farmers tap into what's called carbon markets. And so there are companies out there, and you've probably seen this, that where they're trying to get to net zero in their operations. And so how they do that is to buy offsets. And so they buy essentially someone else's carbon reductions. And so farmers actually can reduce their carbon footprint by implementing different types of practices. And so Bayer has started a small side business called Foreground, and which connects farmers who are implementing conservation practices with companies that are trying to reduce their carbon footprint. There's another, I mentioned cover crops before, and so in the United States, cover crops are becoming more and more popular, and states are actually paying farmers to plant cover crops, but there's been a lack of good cover crop seeds and good cover crop species. And so we purchased this company called CoverCress. And so now we're trying to create cover crops that are more attractive to growers, where they can get additional, make additional money from their cover crop by creating an oil product and renewable fuel product. So that's sort of a win-win in 3 different ways. And another really exciting area that our company has worked on is called short corn. And so um, short corn is essentially the same as regular corn, only it's about 3 or 4 feet shorter. And what that does is it protects the corn plant from getting knocked over during strong wind events, which are becoming more and more um, uh, frequent with climate change. And so uh, when you have a really strong, tall corn plant, it can easily get knocked over, and then the farmer loses that production. They can lose a whole field from one storm. And so we've started this Precion corn system. It also allows the farmer to be able to bring their tractors into the field longer and do a split fertilizer application, so they're not applying all the fertilizer at the beginning. And it also allows closer planting of corn plants. And so I believe we have a short video that we are going to try to show. Can we do that about short corn? I can stop.
Yes, we can do that.
I can stop sharing. I'm going to see if this works.
All businesses carry a certain amount of risk. In farming, a lot of that risk is carried because of the environment, weather, and climate, which is something that we can't really protect ourselves from. In fact, there's a lot of insurance that you can buy to protect you from revenue loss because of the weather. So let's face it, we live in the Midwest, and especially when we think back to 2020, we had a lot of wind events, and that caused yield loss from green snap, root lodging, as well as late season standability issues. So we look at these plants here, they catch a lot of wind, which can potentially give us green snap, which is where we're having those corn plants snapping at a node above the ear. This is a risk for yield loss because we're losing those top leaves, which contribute a lot of yield to that filling ear, as well as the loss of pollination. A lot of what we saw from those July winds in 2020 was root lodging, which is when we don't have enough root mass earlier on in the season to give us the better standability with a bigger plant in July. So we saw a lot of root lodging, a lot of goosenecking, which gave us issues trying to get those ears pollinated well as giving us issues at harvest. The Smart Corn system seeks to protect us from a lot of those risks. So we're seeing a shorter plant stature, which catches less wind, which gives us a reduced risk from green snap. Not only that, but if we've got a smaller sail, it's not going to catch as much wind, protecting us from more risk of root lodging, which is going to mean that we're at less risk of having that late season stalk lodging.
Thank you. Awesome. And so you can see how, we can think differently about agriculture. We can rethink plants. We can build different kinds of plants that can address some of the climate change and other challenges that we're facing. I just wanted to mention that Bayer has a project called Science Connect. And so if we have so many scientists at Bayer that can talk about various types of topics around agriculture. And so if you're interested in finding a speaker for an event from our company, please reach out to us through this tool called Science Connect. I can also put the link in the chat for you. Finally, I want to mention our journal, which is called ACS Agricultural Science and Technology. And I invite any of you who are working in agricultural research to consider submitting your work to our journal. We've been around now 5 years, and we have a nice impact factor. And the scope is quite broad. It covers a lot of different areas of agricultural research. And so if you have any questions on the journal, please reach out to me, or if you're considering writing a paper, especially a review article, we would love to have your work submitted to the journal. So that's all I have today, and I would love to have some questions.